I've got 12:03, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Let's get a little more information about who's here with us. A poll should pop up on your screen here in just a second, asking how you most identify as a person with a disability, a family member, a professional that provides services, or none of the above. It looks like we've got a lot of folks who provide services with us, some people who have a family member with a disability, and some folks with disabilities on the call. So thank you so much for joining us. That poll will go away in just a second. So if you haven't responded yet, please go ahead and click how you most identify. And thank you so much, everybody. Mostly we have folks who provide services to people in the community. So welcome and thank you for joining us today. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. I'm Kathy Brown. I will be your moderator for this session and also presenting some of the information during this hour. This session is being recorded, and we will provide the link to the recording to those who registered. You are muted, so you'll need to use other functions to communicate during our time together. You can turn on your own closed captioning, and please don't be shy. If you hear something you like, if you have a question, if you want to respond to something one of the speakers is saying, please use those reaction buttons. The chat is being monitored, and the Q&A will be monitored at the end. So please, if you have a question as we're going along with our time together today, please do drop it in the Q&A. And then after both Jeannie and I are wrapping up, we will address any questions in the Q&A. There will be some instances where I might ask you to hop on and drop something in the chat during our time together today. First, I'm going to give you a little bit more about our Advocacy Toolbox series. Our Advocacy Toolbox series is designed to connect advocates, empower us with information, deploy innovative strategies, and build our collective power and influence so we can impact the issues that are most important to us. The first three in our series are complete. We started with the compass, finding your why and your way. During this session, we had a guest, Chris Worth, talk to us about this time and place in the larger disability rights movement and gave us a lot of examples of where we as a community have organized to utilize our collective power to make policy change. The second in this series, Hammer and Nails, Building a Strong Foundation in State Advocacy, had a variety of guests talking about some of the hot issues that legislators might be talking about in this upcoming Missouri legislative session. And last week, we had the third in our series, The Lock and Key, Unlocking Real Relationships in Advocacy with Scott Root. Today, we're going to be talking about our blueprint. So we're going to turn tools into actions, explore Easterseals advocacy priorities. And yes, we are going to talk about how a bill becomes a law and how Missouri makes its budget, because in order to effectively engage with a process, it's helpful to know a little bit about that process as well. The final event in our series will be after the holidays on January 6th, where we will welcome back Chris Worth, and he will really zero in on storytelling. Stories are really powerful, and we'll learn how to tell our stories in a way that resonates for lawmakers, mobilizes others to join our cause, and builds momentum for change through advocacy. If you're interested in registering for the next in our series, you can go to our website, eastersealsmidwest.org, and find a box that looks like this. Registration is live and the sessions are free. What you can expect today, like I said, is an overview of the legislative process, an overview of the budget making process. We have Jeannie Marshall, president of Easterseals Midwest, here with us today to talk about Easterseals legislative priorities. And then we're going to do some work to identify actions for the upcoming months during this legislative session. So let's get into it. This is how a bill becomes a law. But first, we're going to start with something a little less complicated. We're just going to give a little bit of what Missouri's government is like. We have 5 statewide offices: governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general, secretary of state, and state auditor. But mostly when we talk about advocacy and we talk about the Missouri General Assembly, we're talking about your House and Senate. So in Missouri, we have 163 representatives in the House. 52 of those are Democrats, 106 are Republicans, and we currently have 5 vacancies. In the Senate, we have 34 senators, 10 Democrats, and 24 Republicans. We have what you would call a supermajority of Republicans in the Missouri General Assembly, which means that they can often get the number of votes that they need to pass legislation without any support from the minority party. And that's been true in Missouri for roughly the last 25 years. Senators in Missouri are limited to 2 4-year terms, and representatives are limited to 4 2-year terms. So we have many opportunities to help decide who is in office. Legislators actually have a relatively limited time to get up to speed and have an impact. So legislators have a lot of issues that they're dealing with in a very short amount of time. And if you heard Scott Roop speak last week, he let us know that it is not the case that as soon as you get elected, all of the sudden you become a super genius and know all about every policy issue that you'll ever have to deal with. So that's where we come into play. It's really important that we educate legislators about what we do, what we care about, and things that they are completely unfamiliar with. And also this year is an election year, which becomes really important too. So those representatives that are limited to 4 2-year terms will be up in November. And so they're going to care very much about what their constituents are talking to them about. So let's talk a little bit about how we change things by being involved in the legislative process and how all of that happens. This is my favorite little graphic. It's Bill. So you might know Bill from a cartoon that is very popular in terms of how a bill becomes a law. We are not going to play that for you, but he sure is cute. The first thing that happens when legislation is filed is that somebody has an idea or problem, right? People contact their legislators about something they need or a proposed solution. It always helps if you are having an issue to have an idea about a solution. So coming to a legislator and saying, boy, everybody really drives fast on my street, fix that, is a different conversation than, I would like for you to put a stop sign on my street. See the difference? So having a proposed solution always helps, or giving them something they can do about it. If your legislator agrees to try to get a law passed to solve your issue or implement your idea, he or she will file a bill. And a bill is what an idea is called before it becomes law. Bill is assigned a committee. The House and Senate have different committees that deal with specific issues. So while your legislator does deal with a variety of issues, they sometimes have some expertise that draw them to one committee or another. Maybe it's mental health, maybe it's energy regulation, maybe it's agriculture. Some deal with the budget, some deal with healthcare, some deal with education. Next, a public hearing is held. This is an opportunity for anybody to come to Jefferson City and in some cases submit written testimony and let the legislature know and let the committee know the impact of the legislation. People can speak in favor of the legislation, or people can speak opposed to the legislation. This is a picture of my friend Gary, who was there in a Senate hearing to testify some years ago on a piece of legislation that was important to him. So during this hearing, like I said, the bill is presented to the committee, and those in favor and those not in favor get together and they go in front of the committee and talk about the reasons they like the bill or the reasons that they don't like the bill. Following that, the committee takes action. So the committee can change a bill, and then it's called a committee substitute. If the committee votes on the bill and the majority votes in favor, it goes out of committee and then on to the next step. If it's not voted on or it's voted down, the bill then stays within committee. So this is one opportunity for a piece of legislation to get stuck. So if the committee does not vote the legislation out or they delay a vote on the legislation, that can lengthen the timeline if you're looking to get something passed. If the committee votes yes, the bill is voted out of committee, placed on a calendar for floor debate. Floor debate is consideration by the full body. So in the case of a Senate bill, it would mean the entire Senate would get to weigh in. In the case of a House bill, it means the entire House would get to weigh in and discuss the legislation together. If that happens, the bill is on the floor. When the floor leader in the House or the Senate pro tem decides to bring the bill up for consideration, it's debated by all members who can then offer changes called amendments to the legislation. And then if it moves along in the process, a vote is taken, amendments are voted on, and then a whole bill is voted on. And then the bill goes through the whole process on the other side. So all Senate bills go through that process on the Senate side, and then they start over on the House side and go through the committee process, go through the floor process, and get a vote. What happens when the two bodies pass legislation that's different from each other is then they have to come together and agree. So sometimes that bill will go to a conference committee to try to work out the differences, and then both bodies have to pass that legislation again. And sometimes one body will just agree to what the other said that they would do, and then it can move forward. If all of that happens, if a bill makes it through both the House and the Senate and the committee process and the floor, and there are a whole bunch of other little processes in between there, the governor can either sign the bill into law or veto the bill. The governor has a limited amount of time to act on a piece of legislation, but the governor can also do nothing. And after about 45 days after adjournment, then the bill goes into effect. In the case of budget bills, the governor can line item veto, which means he can take a magic marker and basically cross it out, say, no, we're not going to do that part. No, we're not going to do that part. Or he can reserve funding to potentially be released later in the fiscal year. The governor does not have that same power with typical legislative bills. So it's an all or nothing. We're going to put everything in there, or we're going to veto all of it. So far this year, does anybody have a guess? Please put your guess in the chat of how many pieces of legislation have been filed so far for consideration by the Missouri General Assembly starting when they go into session in January. The pre-filing for legislation opened December 1st. Pre-filing means legislators can go and file their legislation. That's that very first step in the process. After someone has an idea, they file a bill. So anybody has a guess on how many pieces of legislation have already been filed? It is now December 16th. 600, 1,000. 426, incredibly specific guess. Nick says 1,557, 1,200, 500. Okay, there's quite a range of answers, but some of you are very, very close. So there are just over 1,300 pieces of legislation between the House and the Senate that have been filed so far since December 1st. Does anybody have a guess on a typical pass rate on legislation by percentage? So would you say half of the bills usually pass during a legislative session, 25%, 2%, 100%, got 5%, 1%, 38%, 1%, 1%, 25%? Okay. One 10%. So I'll tell you that the average pass rate over the last 5 years is 5%. So very, very few pieces of legislation of those 1,300 so far that have been filed, and there will be more. They'll be able to file legislation for a few months. Very, very few end up crossing the finish line. And the lowest it's been was in 2022 when it was 0.9% of bills filed actually passed. And that doesn't count the budget bills, which we'll talk about in a minute. So The idea that because you have a piece of legislation passed, you're likely to get to the finish line, I would say is incorrect. Very few things get to the finish line, particularly during their first year, and particularly if people don't know about them. Now, there are some exceptions to that. Maybe it's a governor priority or leadership priority or something like that, but it is a long and bumpy road from filing to getting something passed. That's the big takeaway, I think, through this process. And then even if you get there, many times after legislation is passed, there are some details that need to be worked out. How is it going to play out in real life? How are we going to implement it? So it might not be the end of the road for advocacy, but it is definitely a huge step. While we're here, I'm going to pause for a second and see if anybody has any questions in the chat. It's okay if you don't actually know all of the details of that process. I think what's important for advocates is just to know there's a lengthy and complicated process out there that at different points, different people have more power. So for example, when a bill is in committee, who's the most important person that you can advocate with? If you have an idea about that, drop it in the chat. Committees have chairs. They're kind of in charge of the committee. They're kind of the leader. Committee chair, very good. So if you are, working on a piece of legislation or talking about an issue, then you know a little bit about this process and you know that the bill's in committee or that the bill has to do with healthcare and they have a healthcare committee. You might want to proactively talk to that chair of that committee and see if you can garner their support. I'm going to move on to the budget process. The budget process is not that dissimilar from the legislative process, getting statutory changes, getting laws made, except that they have a little bit of a shorter time frame. The budget is the only thing the Missouri General Assembly is constitutionally required to do during their time together. They convene on January 7th, 2026, and they finish the second week in May. So it is a very compressed timeline for them to make some pretty big, pretty intense decisions. I think between now and when the budget is actually due, there's something like 60 working days that the General Assembly will be in session for them to do all of that. So if you take out holidays, weekends, all of those kinds of things. The Missouri state budget is about $50 billion. And it is comprised of 13 separate pieces of legislation, kind of categorized by topic. And they're kind of always the same. So you'll always find funding related to education in House Bill 2. You'll always find funding related to the Department of Mental Health, the Division of Developmental Disabilities, Health and Senior Services in House Bill 10, and some of that in House Bill 11, and so on and so forth. So those sometimes go to different committees that specialize in those issues as well. A little more about the budget. The total operating budget, I'm not totally sure how this shows up on your screen. It might be a little bit small, but we can send out some of these graphics. On the left-hand side, you'll see kind of where we spend that money. Big red section is education. Big blue section is social services. There's public safety, mental health, health and senior services, agriculture, conservation, higher education. This is the entirety of the budget. When you think about the entirety of Missouri State's budget being about $50 billion, the interesting part about it is there's just about $15 billion that they can make decisions about. So that's called general revenue. And the general revenue dollars, they can sort of decide they're not restricted in any way, or they're not federal funding that come attached with all kinds of rules about how you can use it. Most of Missouri's budget is federal funding and other funding, and the smallest portion of it is general revenue operating. And you can see where some of the things that we might find important are over on that general revenue operating budget side, including education, social services, mental health, health and senior services, things like Medicaid, that's all in there. So let's talk a little bit about what's been going on with Missouri's budget. So it's been growing, which under probably any circumstance you might consider a very positive thing because we have more resources to provide services like some of the good work that you all do for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities and families and children in our communities. The interesting part about what's been happening over the last 5 years or so is that kind of green pump lumped on top there, and that is federal stimulus money. So our budget has been growing, but it has also had an influx of kind of one-time money, right? Money that isn't really expected to stick around. And so we've been spending it gradually over time, but that will eventually go away. You'll also notice that federal funds, the growth in federal funds outpace state funds coming in. So state funds are blue, federal funds are orange. So the federal government actually does have a lot to do with how much money comes into the state to spend. So the budget's been growing and it's expected to shrink. So the graphic that I'm sharing with you all is actually from the Office of Administration budget instructions that go out to the departments and is out on Office of Administration's website for anybody to see. You'll note that in the budget instructions, they say that there is a pending shortfall of about $1 billion. Now, some external organizations put that at a little closer to $2 billion. Remember, the whole state's budget is about $50 billion, and the general revenue portion is about $15 billion. So we're talking about the difference of $1 or $2 billion. In the big picture, it doesn't seem like that much, but once you get down to the general revenue portion, that can make a difference. Missouri is required to only spend as much as we bring in. So we can't say, well, we're going to, take out a loan on future anticipated revenue and we're going to spend more money. It has to net out to zero. So if we anticipate a reduction in revenue, then we cannot plan to spend more than we anticipate taking in. So I think that that's a really important part. And I'm going to pause here before we get into Easterseals, key issues and legislative priorities to see if there are any questions or comments in the chat. And I'll give just a few seconds for any questions to come in before we move to Jeannie Marshall. Okay. Seeing none, I'm going to move to introduce Jeannie, the president of Easterseals Midwest. Jeannie has been contributing to supports and services to people with intellectual developmental disabilities and autism for the entirety of her career and has been with Easterseals for 30, for many years, doing amazing good work. And we're really happy to have her here today to talk about some of the key issues that impact our services. So Jeannie, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you. Thanks, Kathy. And I want to clarify my comment about it being a great graphic was not the direction that it's going, but that it was visually pleasing to see all the colors. So just to clarify that. Thanks, everyone, for joining today. I wanted to just talk through briefly the key issues that we see as Easterseals that we're keeping an eye on. We know that these are going to impact Easterseals, our team, and the people that we serve. So the first one there, making sure that no one with disabilities is stuck waiting for the services that they need. If you think about it in terms of in Missouri, there are more people who want services than there's money to go around. So just in plain terms, the state has to decide if they're going to allocate more funds to serve those who are waiting or limit it to the same number of people who get those services each year. You'll often hear about slots for funding. That's a term that's often referred to. And that's because the budget will only be able to fund a certain number of people, and those budgets are based on that allocation. And as you know, many of the supports are lifelong, so it's rare for an existing slot to be freed up. One of the things that we often are advocating for is the expansion of funds so that we can serve more people who we know really, really need those services. The next one there, increase community providers' capacity to serve people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Providers have to be able to grow to meet the needs of the community. We know there's a flood of people coming into services in the next 10 years who are living currently at home with aging parents. We expect sort of the tsunami of kids coming out of high school and people who are living with aging parents that are going to come into the need for services. And we, as a provider and our other partner providers, want to be ready to be able to say, we've got what you need and you can help access that. Obviously, that takes funding that will need to be added in the budget. Um, we have to have the ability to recruit and retain enough staff to provide those services and those individuals and those staff need to be paid in a way that they can make a career out of this meaningful and important work. And so we do a lot of work around retention and recruitment, but it's only as good as again, coming back to the budget, the funding has to be there in order for the math to work, if that makes sense. DSPs, direct support professionals, those are our frontline staff who make the magic happen every day. So, one of our priorities is that we need to stand up for DSPs to earn the wages necessary to recruit and retain quality staff. Missouri had a study completed in 2019, and that showed that we needed to be paying $21 an hour based on the work that was done. It was a pretty in-depth study. It looked at all the different tasks and duties that a direct support professional would do on their job. And these are people who work in our home, in the homes where we provide support. These are individuals who are helping people remain and find engaging employment and be actively engaged in their community and be included in their community. So these are the staff that we hire each and every day to execute on the mission. So the study showed that we should be paying $21 an hour for this level of work. And as a reminder, this was a study that was done in 2019. And currently, our rate of reimbursement is about $17 an hour on average. And so you can see there's a significant gap there in what people should be paid and what the reimbursement rates will allow for. Um, we're just not keeping pace if you look at the budget. We don't set the rates for the services that we're reimbursed for. And so if you think about, you go to a grocery store, a restaurant, any kind of retail store in the community, and you can see prices creeping up. They are able to adjust their prices and command a certain payment for their product to help cover things like wages and cost of living increases and the adjustments that happen in terms of a budget. Easterseals and providers like us are not able to do that. We don't set our rates. We are assigned a rate by the funder, and that's the rate that we take. So we have to do the most good that we can within those rates. So your advocacy has played a tremendous role in the increases that have occurred over time, but we know that there'll be more work to be done. The next bullet there, fully fund services for people with autism. At Easterseals alone, we have probably more than 1,000 new referrals each year. The rate of diagnosis is increasing as more and more people understand about autism. We know that early intervention is key, and so being a service provider who has had decades of history in serving people with autism, we're often one of the number one referral sources that they come to. What's happened over the last 10 years is that the funding for these services has remained flat. There was a small incremental bump last year that was what Kathy referred to as one-time funding that we don't anticipate that we'll be able to get again. And so when we see this rate of increase in terms of the number of referrals with the same amount of funding, you can see that services either have to get more minimized in terms of the amount of impact that we can have for each person, or that people will remain on a wait list. And neither of those are good scenarios. So we know that the advocacy around increased funding in autism will be significant. In this period of time over the last 5 to 7 years, there's been many millions, I would say, of dollars poured into the diagnostic centers during this time. And so what's happening is kids are getting their diagnosis sooner, but then they get stuck at that point of needing service delivery because there aren't enough funds to accommodate the number of individuals on the wait list who are being referred. And then the last one there, maintain services for Missourians with developmental disabilities that are paid through local, county, state, and federal funding. So much of our funding at Easterseals is braided through a variety of sources. And what that means is it takes a combination of funding sometimes to fully cover costs. And even that still leaves a significant gap that fundraising needs to cover or an alternative source needs to pay for. So we need to do what we can to advocate, tell our story at all levels. I was excited to hear that Chris Worth is going to come back in our fifth session of the series and talk about how important your story is, because legislators will tell us, you know, you can give us this handout, you give us this piece of paper, you come in and you talk facts and statistics, which are important. But at the end of the day, I'm going to remember the story that that person told me about their child who was able to, you know, attend a program or find a job or live independently in the community. Those are the things that stick with the legislator. So that story couldn't be more important. Um, Things that in terms of funding, like you're hearing a lot of this on the news about the senior tax freeze or bills that are going through that are trying to eliminate county taxes. Those have a significant negative effect on the services that we provide. And so advocacy around those things, helping people understand what those funds pay for. Everybody thinks it would be great to have a tax cut in the sense of, oh, that's more money in my pocket. But what they may not understand is what those tax monies fund each and every day in the community. And so we have to be part of that message to help them understand. As Kathy referenced too, we see some things coming down here with the Medicaid cuts that are being handed down to Missouri to manage. And we don't have a lot of detail around what that will mean, but there's no doubt that we're going to have to play an active role in assuring that services that we provide are protected. So there's lots to be done, and we absolutely appreciate your involvement and your support of those issues going forward. I'm going to turn it back over to Kathy, or if there's any questions.
Thanks so much, Jeannie. Any questions for Jeannie related to some of those key issues? I think that Jeannie noted this as she was describing each, but you'll notice a little green dollar sign next to the ones that are budgetary. That's really important. The urgency around the advocacy for the budget items should be high. And because, as I showed you in the previous slide, it's a short and intense process. So you can't be late because by the time you reach out to a legislator, it might already be out of their hands. Those decisions might already be made. So it's really important to advocate early and often. And we'll talk a little bit more about some of the activities that'll be key in having a successful legislative session upcoming in just a moment. Let me just check the chat for any questions. I saw too that we have our CEO, Wendy Sullivan. Just want to give her an opportunity if there's anything she wants to add, either about key issues coming up in 2026 or any historical information that she'd like to offer related to some of these priorities. And if not, that's fine too, because I'm totally putting her on the spot. Looks like not. So let's talk about advocacy activities. First, what you can expect from Easterseals. So if you already forgot how a bill becomes a law, I'm going to tell you it doesn't matter. The most important thing is that you are connected with an organization that's following that and knows how that works and can share that with you. Everybody is very busy, has full lives, many, many things to pay attention to. So, you know, being able to go to the House or Senate website and look up a piece of legislation and decide what to do based on where it is in the process is kind of a heavy lift. The good news is Easterseals has people who are watching that for you and have an advocacy-focused newsletter with plain language, timely, applicable information on our priorities and other key issues. You can expect specific and focused calls to action, to write, to call, to email at key points in the process when it'll have the maximum amount of impact. In-district visits to program locations, homes, local coffee shops, etc. Easterseals has a long and wonderful history of opening their doors and programs to legislators and helping them, not only understand from a conversation the impact of our services, but to show them. And as Jeannie said, that makes a tremendous difference. We'll be organizing opportunities for visits to the Capitol in Jefferson City. Most legislators are in Jefferson City Monday through Thursday during the legislative session. And when they're not having committee meetings or floor debate, they are meeting with constituents, lobbyists, and other legislators on issues. And in February, the 25th Annual Disability Rights Legislative Day will occur. That's a really very fun an exciting opportunity not only to demonstrate to the Missouri General Assembly that we are a large and organized community of people with shared interests. It's a great opportunity to meet with other advocates from all across the state. Now let's talk about your part. I am going to share a document with you in the chat called My Personal Advocacy Plan. I am also going to share a link with you. Let's see if I can find it. Okay. If you will go to the chat and open that document, you will find I'm sorry. You will find a blueprint that you can use and that other people in your life can use called My Personal Advocacy Plan. It asks a variety of questions and allows you to store information related to why you care about this issue. This can be the beginning of a framework for telling your story to a policymaker. Has an opportunity to identify your legislators and to make some commitments for this upcoming session. I've also included a link to a Google form that you can fill out online, which will also submit to both myself and send you a copy so that you can be engaged in advocacy. So I'm going to share what that looks like here. So you can go here to this Google form and fill out your email address, your name, a little bit about why you care about the issue that you care about, and identify your state representative and your state senator. You can identify your advocacy commitments. Some people would rather literally do anything than pick up the phone and make a call. Some people prefer to talk as opposed to type. Some people feel very comfortable in person and some people don't. Whatever your advocacy commitments are this session, we can help make that happen. Easterseals has hosted legislators in people's homes, at coffee shops in the community, at already planned meetings. It all works and it all works really well. I remember having a conversation years ago with a family, and I said, well, why don't you just invite them over to your house? Because they were, noting that their daughter really is a lot to manage in public. I said, well, invite them over. And they could not believe that a legislator would actually come and visit them at their home. And that does and can happen and can be a very powerful tool to demonstrate to a legislator what life is like for folks and what you might need from them. So this is a tool that if you are one of the majority of professionals that are on this call, you can take and you can share with your teams. You can take and share with people you support. You can help them make a plan. And you can do advocacy together. I'm going to share one more link that will help you utilize that tool in the chat. And this is a link to look up your legislator. So probably many of you might already know who your legislators are, but if not, please go to the chat and grab that link. And if you wouldn't mind, you just type in your address. You may need to find the additional 4 of your zip code in order for that to work. You may not. I just did it and did not have to. And then drop the name of your state senator and your state representative in the chat. Don't see any links in the chat. Let me try again. There we go. Sorry about that. Thank you. The link should be there now for everyone. It starts with https at senate.mo.gov legislator lookup. There we go. See some legislators identified coming through. The first and most important contact are the people that represent you. They may not be on the right committee. They may not be powerful enough to pass legislation. They may not even file legislation or be on the budget committee when those really important issues come up for debate in budget. But they do represent you, and it's very important that they know you and can advocate for you at the Capitol. Oftentimes, legislators who aren't on the right committee or aren't on budget committee have a constituent, and they're able to go find the right legislator, right, the chair of that committee or someone who's on budget, and help push them to take action on your behalf. Okay, anybody else identify their legislator, want to share who they are? House and Senate member, Carla May. There you go. Thank you, Chris. Representative Joe Dahl, that's right here around Rock Hill, isn't it? Wendy Hausman, Senator Coleman, wonderful. I have, while people are doing that, and hopefully you can download and utilize those tools to create your own advocacy blueprint that you can utilize through session. I do have one question in the Q&A, and please, we have 14 minutes left. If you have any additional questions, please drop them there. What are her thoughts on the elimination of income tax? How concerned should we be? I'm not sure which her that might be referring to, but let me maybe provide a little bit of additional context for the question. The governor announced not that long ago his priority to eliminate income tax. Income tax is a pretty significant portion of the overall general revenue that Missouri takes in. So there's a lot of discussion right now about how that would work. Would we replace it with something? Would we replace it with something like a sales tax? How would that impact people at different income levels? And what would that look like? Right now, there doesn't seem to be incredibly concrete plans related to the elimination of income tax. I believe, and Jeannie, if you've heard something different, let me know, that an elimination of income tax would likely have to go to a vote of the people of Missouri to change our tax structure that significantly. And so we would all kind of have an opportunity to weigh in on that as those proposals kind of get fleshed out. But there is a lot of discussion right now about the elimination of certain taxes, including income tax, property tax changes. I think Jeannie talked about that related to local funding that impacts people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So when you think about disability rights issues, you don't typically think about tax policy. But because most of the services that people access are publicly funded, the mechanism of bringing money into the state, into that general revenue pot, is really important because it determines how much of it there is to go around. And as Jeannie said, more people need services than even currently get them, and that we're funding to a level that allows everyone to have access. So I don't think that's probably a clear answer, but also would say, Jeannie, if you have anything to add to that, I would welcome your comments as well.
Yeah, I would just reiterate what you said. Actually, there's not enough money right now to go around. And so any cuts to the existing funding without a clear replacement, I mean, we don't know what the algorithm would be for, what sales tax would produce and then how that would be distributed in the same way. It seems like it would be a threat to the work that we do, but we'd have to wait and see to find out the particulars.
Yeah, and to think too about how a change in the tax structure might impact people that we serve and that we support in terms of potentially paying more on sales and service tax as opposed to income
Exactly.
tax. And
It shifts who pays for it. So now everybody who's a consumer and paying for something out in the stores or restaurants, et cetera, takes on the impact of replacing that income tax.
any other questions? We have about 10 minutes left. It looks like the identification of legislators has slowed down a little bit. I encourage you to click on the link for the Google Sheet and make some commitments related to advocacy. We, let's see, can follow up with anybody who wants assistance in that regard. It doesn't look like my document made it to everyone. There. Okay. Any additional questions? Well, on behalf of Easterseals, I would love to thank all of you for spending an hour with us to talk about these really important issues. The Missouri General Assembly is going to be back in full force on January 7th. I hope that you will look for additional information about how and when to best advocate. And I hope you'll join us on January 6th to finish off our advocacy toolbox series with Chris Worth and learn how to tell a story that really sticks with a legislator and has a really tremendous impact. I will follow up via email with everyone who registered for this call with the recording, and we'll share the materials that were shared in the chat as well. Thank you so much, Jeannie, for joining us and very clearly and eloquently sharing what's really important to Easterseals as an organization as we move into this session. Much appreciated.
Glad to be here. If I could just add one thing, when Kathy talks about the information that you'll receive from Easterseals, the call to action when we put that out could not be easier. And so, you had a chance to do the lookup today. When we send out a call to action that says, please contact your legislature regarding this issue, the form that is embedded in that email will automatically do the lookup for you and it will automatically send it directly to who we're asking you to send it to. So again, just not knowing the timing between now and January 6th, we don't anticipate a call to action going out, but when it does, it couldn't be easier and we truly appreciate your effort to make that happen.
Thank you so much, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.